Well, good morning, everybody. My name is Mark Josted. I'm Director of HR Compliance here at J.B. Hunt, and we are very happy for you to take time out of your busy schedule to join us here this morning. We've got an exciting event. I'm excited about the event that we've got for you this morning. We've got a fantastic guest speaker, and I can't think of a better way to round out Disability Employment Awareness Month here, the month of October. I suspect you've probably had a lot of opportunities to participate in webinars and other events to celebrate National Disability Employment Awareness Month. But our guest speaker here today, and I decided that October 29th would be the best day for her presentation so we can officially say that we saved the best for last this month. And I assure you that you're going to really enjoy the program. What I'd like to do here first is just kind of run through the agenda and what we've got for you over the next hour and 15 minutes or so. So if you'd advance the slide, Mark. So today's agenda, Understanding Drives Inclusion. I want to talk a little bit about what we have going on at J.B. Hunt. Extremely proud of the work that we've done here over the last year. Working with our safety folks, human resources folks, our operations folks. I got a great story to tell, and I got a video I want to show you, and it's a fantastic story that will be very inspiring for you today on Friday, the last day of the month. So we'll do that. Then I'm going to turn the program over to Haley Moss, who is an author, neurodiversity expert, fantastic speaker. I've seen her speak in person at a conference about a year or two ago, and she's gonna talk about disability employment in general, specifically with a focus on neurodiversity. So we're really excited to have Haley, distinguished speaker, very prominent speaker, and somebody who's in demand. So we're very fortunate to have her. And then after Haley wraps up, we're going to have some final remarks from John Taylor. He's Executive Director of Arkansas Governor's Council on Developmental Disabilities. He's going to have some final words for us, some words of encouragement, and that'll wrap up the program. So without further ado, what I would like to do now is this is about two and a half minutes long. I want you to get a sense, get a feel for what we've got going on here at J.B. Hunt, and it's a fantastic story. So enjoy the video. I'll be right back.
I drove a truck from '92 when I went in the military. I had my car accident back in 2003, and that was always my main goal, was to get back into a truck. I'm just one of these people that you tell me I can't do something, I'm going to do it, and then take a picture of it and send it to you to show that I've done it. And be able to go home to my family, and knowing that I can provide for them, I can give them, give him my grandson anything he comes to me and asks for. This company has provided me the ability to do that. There was never a, we don't think you're going to fit here. It was always, what can we do to make sure that we accommodate everything you do? It was always a positive, always forward. They made sure that everything was comfortable for me. It was never an uncomfortable situation for me. That's all I ever asked for. It's a support system. That's another thing with J.B. Hunt. They're part of a support system. Everything I do, they help me out. They support me. They lift me up. They help me. I know it sounds like I'm standing in front of a camera rambling about J.B. Hunt and this, that, but it's the truth. I would tell anybody that's in a wheelchair, has any kind of disability, don't ever think you can't do it, because you're only limited by what your limitations are in your mind. Most of all, don't stop. Keep going. Whether it's with J.B. Hunt, whether it's with anything you do, always keep going.
Hello, my name is Mark Josted. I'm Director of HR Compliance here at J.B. Hunt, and I hope you enjoyed the video about our driver, James We're so very proud of all that he's accomplished, and we're also very proud of what we're doing to help individuals with disabilities get into the workforce and be successful. I want to encourage you to get involved in this movement. Please reach out to the Arkansas affiliate of Disability In, or reach out to the Arkansas Rehabilitation Services Office. They've been a tremendous partner with us here at J.B. Hunt and very, very supportive in our efforts. Thank you for your continued interest in this movement, and thank you for your commitment to helping individuals with disabilities have more employment opportunities. Have a great day.
Okay, thank you, Mark. I hope you all enjoyed that. Yeah, again, we're extremely proud of the work James is doing for us. You can tell he's got a passion for working hard regardless of any barriers in his way, and he continues to be a successful driver for us up in the Northeast. Regarding involvement with the Arkansas Disability In affiliate, you're going to see the website again later in the presentation, but I do want to encourage you to get involved. di-ar.org. Contact the website. There's resources available. If you've got questions about how to handle situations, best practices, success stories you want to share, we would encourage you to do that, because our end in mind is to open up opportunities as much as possible for individuals who are differently abled. So without further ado, I want to introduce Haley Moss as our featured speaker here today. She's got a fantastic presentation ready to go. And Haley, I'm going to turn it over to you. Oh, before we do that, if you do have, I think there's been an announcement made, but if you do have questions along the way, we're going to take some time permitting, we'll do our best to take some questions. If you do have questions, submit them in the chat, and we'll take some time at the end after Haley gets done, and hopefully we can work through those questions near the end of the presentation. Okay, Haley, it's all yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you for showing us and teaching us all a little bit more about what Disability In Arkansas and J.B. Hunt are all doing. I think it's really exciting. So I'm going to introduce myself really quickly before we get started. My name is Haley Moss. I am an attorney. I am an author of several books, and I am really passionate about neurodiversity and disability advocacy. I'm autistic. I was diagnosed when I was a child, and somehow I am here. I guess that's kind of what I'm thinking about. But we're really going to be talking about neurodiversity and disability at work. I know whether or not this is something that's new to you or something you're experienced with, I hope that there's something that we are able to learn and grow from. I'm personally really, really excited. So I'm going to share my screen and get our presentation show on the road right now. I believe you're going to be able to see my stuff in just a second. And without further ado, let's get started. Let me just see. Sorry, Teams is being weird and having feelings and not letting me want to start this. So give me a second. There we go. So we're going to be talking about disability employment and celebrating neurodiversity together. So the two really go hand in hand. But when we're having this conversation, I think it's really important that we understand that they are alike. But before we get started, I want to talk a little bit about accessibility as part of our housekeeping and as part of having some understanding of what's going on. So for me, I take inclusion really seriously. I take accessibility seriously. It's something that we do together. Access is a team sport that I can't sit here and tell you what you can and can't do to make today accessible. If you need anything from us, we're happy to help. I know that there are closed captions available if you need to be using them. You can toggle those on your Teams windows. I think they are extremely cool and helpful for everybody. And I know that because we are in a virtual environment, there is this kind of pressure that you have to be very present. But if you need to take a break, if you are using cameras, I know that some of us on the behind the scenes have cameras, or maybe that a lot of you are also in like listen only mode. But if you need to step away, if seeing your own face is distracting, if you have something urgent that pops up, you need to fidget, you need to move your hands. I do this all the time. Or you just feel overwhelmed, or like there's just so much here that you need to take a break. Do what you have to do. Also, when we're talking about copies of slides, because I know that some of us are very visual learners and might want to refer back to things later, I make sure that my images have alt text and should be screen reader accessible as well. If this is unfamiliar to you, alt text are basically image descriptions that allow people who are blind or have visual impairments to access images or visual content and to be able to know what's being shown on screen. And screen readers are a very cool technology that helps these folks access information. So if that's something new to you, the more you know. And with that, we're going to kind of start off today with a little bit of ground setting and level setting. So I know when we think about disability, some of us go, what even is that? Do I have a disability? Is disability just people who use accessible parking spaces? Is it things that are apparent or very visible? I don't know if my health condition counts. I know a lot of us sometimes have these complicated feelings about what disability is and is not. But I am a lawyer by trade, and the easiest way for me to understand kind of what's going on and who does or does not have disability comes from the law. So we have the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990, which is pretty much the largest, most comprehensive civil rights package that deals with disabilities. It is older than me, so we have plenty of time to have figured it out, to learn a little bit, be compliant, all that good stuff. But when they define disability, they are talking about a physical or mental impairment which substantially limits at least one major life activity. And that sounds like legalese. So we're thinking about things that are physical or cognitive and mental. So that's already telling us things that are what we traditionally see as disability, and also things that we might not see as visibly. And when we're thinking about major life activities, there are things that we do that are important to most of our daily lives. And when we're thinking about work and we're thinking about employment, I know even referring back to the video we saw earlier, these can include things like driving. We can be thinking about concentrating. We could be thinking about communicating with one another. We can be thinking about reading or seeing or hearing or moving. There's so many different things. So when we're talking about major life activities and disability, we are talking about things that seem visible, things that involve mobility, things that are cognitive. We are talking about mental health. We are talking about chronic illnesses. There's a lot of different people and folks who often do get left behind or we don't hear enough about when we talk about disability, because there is this kind of misconception at times that everything we're thinking about has to be visual. We have to be able to see it for it to be real, when that's not the case. Disability is a very wide group of people. It covers a lot of ground. And what makes disability interesting is compared to other forms of marginalization and other minority groups, it's the only group that you can join at any point in your life. So currently about 1 in 4 Americans has a disability. And the only thing that separates my non-disabled friends from people with disabilities is about a split second. That you can become disabled through a split second, a change in circumstances, or if you are lucky to be alive for a long time. Disability is not something that's out of the ordinary. It's not something that happens to only some people. Some of us are just born that way. Others join the club later in life. And when we're thinking about neurodiversity, which is something we're going to be talking about a lot too, that's also part of this and also something you can possibly join, or maybe you do have a form of neurodivergence and you just don't know it. Or maybe you might acquire that too. So when we're thinking about neurodivergence and neurodiversity, there's a lot to be thinking about. This is new to a lot of folks. I understand if it is. But when we're talking about neurodiversity, we're really getting to the heart of that we all have different brains. That's not a bad thing. That when we're talking about neurodiversity as a whole, we're really saying that neurological differences are normal. It's something that needs to be recognized, respected, and accepted, just like any other human variation. We all have traits that make us who we are, who make us different, parts of our identities. I am a redhead. That's naturally occurring. There are a certain amount of redheads, maybe not that many. We have gender, we have where we're from, the color of our eyes, all of these different things that make us human, our racial backgrounds. We have all these human variations. They aren't necessarily bad things, although maybe if you did grow up and you were a redhead, maybe you did get bullied as a kid. But that being said, we all are different, and that's a good thing. The same goes for our brains. And when we're talking about how our brains work, I'm not talking about that we think differently and our opinions are different. I'm not saying that neurodiversity means the same as diversity of thought, where I'm saying that we need to value everybody's personal opinions and political ideologies. I'm saying the way that we process information and experience the world around us is different based on how our brains work. For me, because I'm autistic, the world is very loud. It's a very sensory heavy place. Sometimes it's confusing. And the ways that people communicate with verbal and nonverbal cues can sometimes be lost on me. So our brains work differently no matter who you are. Some of us are neurotypical. Our brains work as expected, in this seemingly normal way, whatever normal is supposed to mean. Others, like myself, we're neurodivergent, and our brains work outside of what's expected. But that doesn't mean that something is wrong with us or that we're broken. When we're talking about neurodivergence, a lot of it does come down to how we think and how we process information and how we communicate with one another. So as someone on the autism spectrum, a lot of the hallmarks of that are in socializing and social communication. The same goes for other types of disabilities that are pretty similar. So when we're thinking about intellectual disabilities, we're thinking about certain mental health conditions. All these things have differences in how we communicate and how we process information. And a lot of different people fall into these buckets. Is that we have about 1 in 7 people who can be considered neurodivergent worldwide. That's just a lot of people. And some of these ideas, because I know we think, who is neurodivergent? Is we're thinking about autism, ADHD, learning disabilities. So we're thinking about those who might have dyslexia, dyspraxia, or other forms of learning differences. We think about things like Tourette syndrome. We think about our friends who also have intellectual disabilities. We think about psychiatric and mental health conditions. And we also think about acquired cognitive disabilities, like a traumatic brain injury, Alzheimer's, dementia. That's a lot of people. And I really want to make that clear that we're talking about a very broad brush, that we are painting this broad picture of who is neurodivergent on purpose. There's a huge misconception in our community that neurodiversity is a synonym for autism and ADHD, that it is a fancy way of saying that we are the people who are seen as socially acceptable or desirable in the workforce. And quite frankly, that's just not true. We're thinking about so many more people, and I make it very clear whenever I have the chance to emphasize the inclusion of intellectual disabilities and mental health conditions and psychiatric disabilities, and not just anxiety and depression. When we're talking about mental health, especially, I want it to be clear that we are including people who do get more discrimination, who are more heavily stigmatized. So I am thinking about people who have complex conditions like bipolar disorder or schizophrenia as well. I think that we have a tendency to see these folks as too difficult or undeserving in some way, shape, or form. And a lot of that comes down to this idea of ableism, which we're going to unpack a little bit together as well later on. But I really think when we talk about neurodiversity and we talk about disability employment, we do make sure that we talk about people who are facing the most stigma. And oftentimes, that's people with non-apparent disabilities that aren't always visible, that we can't always tell just by looking at someone. And they usually are intellectual and psychiatric disabilities who bear the brunt of the discrimination and stigma in our society. So please make sure that when we're talking about neurodiversity, that we include as many people as possible. We don't want to accidentally be saying that only people who have autism or ADHD are worthwhile, who deserve to be employed. All of us deserve an opportunity to be able to contribute, especially if we want it, we're willing, ready, and able to do so. And here's the thing about neurodiversity at work and disability at work more broadly, is these are seen as really good things, that we see technical fixes when neurodiverse teams are involved. So when we're thinking about German tech company SAP, they had a fix in their technology that saved the company nearly $40 million because they had neurodiverse teams working on these issues. When we are hiring people with disabilities, we make more money. I hate to put it so bluntly, but when companies do hire people with disabilities, they have higher revenues and higher shareholder returns than companies that don't employ people with disabilities. We also have favorable public opinions. I know, especially coming from legal, people don't trust lawyers. People don't like lawyers. But when we are part of our communities and we're making sure that we're hiring people who are multiply marginalized and people with disabilities, we feel good about it. It helps soften that image, at least in that regard. But I think about this a lot more practically than lawyers in the law. I live across the street from 2 grocery stores. And one of the grocery stores in my community is very involved in disability inclusion. Every time I go, there is a young man with Down syndrome who works at one of the cash registers. And I've seen him every single week. I go to the grocery store at least once a week because I live walking distance and it makes my life easier. And every time I get a giant smile. I would get hugs before the pandemic too. And of course, seeing this person in my community made me feel good. I was always happy to support them. And knowing that this person is gainfully employed in my community, is making a fair wage, is part of things, it means a lot to me. And it makes me feel good about supporting the stores compared to the other guys down the street. I know we all have stories like this where we see someone with a visible disability of some sort in public working. That if we've seen someone working at a coffee shop, the deli counter, the bakery counter, or the cashiers like I do, it just makes us feel good about ourselves. We feel good about supporting people who support our community. We just do. It's one of those warm, fuzzy feelings that we get. I know I get that, and I know a lot of you probably do too. Finally, we all benefit from working with different kinds of minds. There's no one way to solve problems. If we all thought exactly the same, we wouldn't see any innovation. That disability inherently does drive this. It drives innovation. We have to be creative. We're constantly adapting in a world that doesn't always have us in mind. So there's so many good things that come when we have neurodiversity and disability inclusion. But we have a lot of disparities when we talk about employment, and especially in the neurodiversity space, we see these very high unemployment rates compared to all other disabilities. And disability employment is already precarious to think about sometimes. But for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities like autism and other intellectual conditions, the employment rates are really low. Is that we have, especially at the college level and above, I know we think about labor in terms of education sometimes. When we're talking about college grads, that employment rate can be as high as 85% for autistic people. And something else that's really scary when I think about college grads and people who went on to higher education after college is there was a really interesting study, I believe it was last year, from the Ruderman Family Foundation. And it was showing that in a lot of major markets and cities, that disabled people with master's degrees and the higher level of education someone had, the larger the salary disparity was. I also noticed that when I was doing research about what's going on in the legal profession, and that lawyers with disabilities right out of school were making on average about $10,000 less than their non-disabled colleagues who are fresh out of school as well. So we have this huge pay gap and we have an employment gap. So no matter where we're coming from, it seems that there seem to be continued problems. We also have slightly over 1/3 of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities who are actually being paid for their work. So when we're thinking about paid and unpaid work, think about how many people might be taking unpaid internships or apprentices and who need that experience able to get in the door. So think about young people especially, and a lot of young people with intellectual and developmental disabilities don't get work experience early on. They don't get it when they're teenagers and might be working in a grocery store or in retail. They might not get it after that. They might not get it as unpaid interns for a bunch of different reasons, and then it makes it harder to enter those first paid jobs, either out of school or once we hit adulthood. So there's a huge gap there too. And when we see gaps in employment, I know a lot of managers get confused or they wonder, why is this person seen as unemployable? And of course, we know with the pandemic, our employment rates have been a little all over the board, but they've been especially high when it comes to people with disabilities. Is that about 17.9% of us were employed in 2020, which doesn't sound too great. And then when we think about how the non-disabled population was doing, it was about 61.8% of non-disabled adults. So there's definitely a huge difference in how disability employment goes compared to the general population. And the unemployment rate for us was about 12.6%. These are all from the Department of Labor. I believe the regular non-disabled employment rate was a little bit higher than that. So it was actually 7.9% unemployment for non-disabled people. So we definitely have that huge difference where it's close to double. And of course, we have people who might not have full-time work. And when we're thinking about why people don't have full-time work, there's a lot of different reasons why someone with a disability might work part-time. That there's a group of people who might not work full-time because they have concerns about the disability benefits that they're already receiving. Maybe it has to deal with the health care they've received as part of Medicare or Medicaid. There's a lot of different issues to be unpacking here. But 6% of those people work part-time because of something like reduced hours or being unable to find full-time work. So think about how many people are kept out of full-time work for economic reasons and also other reasons. There's a lot of things that can go wrong in the disability employment space, and that's even before we start thinking about fair pay issues such as sub-minimum wage, that if you have a certificate from the federal government, you can pay less than federal minimum wage, which is about $7.25 an hour last time I checked. And if you are a certificate holder, that is something that goes to the federal government. You can look up who is a certificate holder for Section 14C of the Fair Labor Standards Act if you're really curious and want to see who is treating people with disabilities as fairly as possible in your communities. But that's a whole other discussion. I think the civil rights components of this are things that I could be talking about all day long. But when we're thinking about why there is such widespread unemployment or judgment, one of the biggest things that I've noticed is stigma and microaggressions. So everything that you see on the slide here are things that I have been told. I have been told every single one of these during employment or in another setting. So I have been told that everybody's a little autistic and we're all on the spectrum, or I've been condescendingly asked, why don't you understand that? It's so easy. And of course, for anyone who has a seemingly invisible disability, the greatest hit of all, I never would have known if you didn't tell me. And something about these things you're probably thinking is they don't seem that harmful. They don't seem that bad compared to some of the other stuff you might have heard about people with disabilities. It doesn't sound as severe as the R word. It doesn't sound like our history of discrimination. But these things are still harmful nonetheless, and that's why they're called microaggressions. And when we're thinking about these microaggressions, they're telling a different story. I know that a lot of people don't mean to be seemingly hurtful, or they're unintentionally hurting me when they say these things. And why do they hurt is probably the next question you might have. See, when someone says everybody's a little autistic or we're all on the spectrum, they're dismissing the things that are really hard for me. I do struggle with stuff in my everyday life. Maybe there's stuff that you struggle with or your struggles feel kind of similar, but they might not be debilitating or disabling the way that they are for me. And everyone has different levels of cognitive ability. So there are things that might be really, really easy for you to understand, but that doesn't mean that it's going to be easy for me. The same is true with the type of skills that I have as well. I might think it's really easy to do something on a computer, or I might think it's really easy to paint a picture. And you might say, that is something that seems impossible to you. If I told you how easy it was, you probably wouldn't feel so great about yourself. The same goes for me when you tell me that something like a fundamental social cue, or making sure that you get cognitive information right the first time, is really easy. And the greatest hit of all, I never would have known if you didn't tell me. When people say this, it tells me something else. You have a very specific view of what disability is and is not, or you're complimenting my coping skills. I work really, really hard every single day to try to assimilate and fit in to a world that isn't always accepting and understanding about disability. The world that I have to navigate sees people with disabilities as broken or that need to be fixed to act more neurotypical or non-disabled. And what makes this frustrating is I work really hard to make sure that I have these social skills and these different skills to kind of succeed at work, and even things like managing my own sensory needs. So when you're telling me that, I hear that you are coping so well that you seem normal to me. I don't want to strive for that. I'm trying to fit in and trying to survive. I'm not trying to be somebody else, or I'm not trying to be normal. There wasn't something wrong with me to begin with. And a lot of this kind of comes to the idea of ableism. When we're talking about ableism really speaks to this idea of prejudice, stereotypes, and discrimination against people with disabilities, really resting on that belief that we are broken and need to be fixed or cured, which, spoiler alert, we aren't. If you know people with disabilities or you are disabled yourself, there's nothing that's wrong with who you are. Disability, and especially if you are neurodivergent, it's not a moral failure, as we are so often told to believe that maybe we're just dumb or lazy because we don't understand something, or we're resistant or we're stubborn or any of these things. There's not something that's inherently wrong with us as people. We're valid, and especially when it comes to communication, everybody has different ways that they experience the world. Everybody has different ways that they share information and what they've learned and what they're understanding. A lot of the times, the way that I communicate with other people who are on the autism spectrum or who are neurodivergent looks kind of different. That we're very blunt with each other. I'm not very good at the small talk. And yet, it's seen as very rude in neurotypical culture to talk like that. And what makes it so interesting to me is I think that I have to switch between languages a lot. That I speak both neurodivergent and neurotypical. But a lot of neurotypical people think that when I speak in my regular native language, so to speak, that it's just a broken, failed version of their language, when it's an entire different way of communicating. If we reframed it to be this way, we would see that there's two different skill sets that are happening or occurring, not that one is just a failure or less than the other skill set. How we talk about this and how we view this is really important, especially when we think about work. And if you don't know, one of the biggest issues that comes up and why stigma also is so major to be thinking about is it plays into decisions of when we talk about disability, if we do, especially because some of us can pass or mask as non-disabled or neurotypical. So when we talk about disclosure, it's a really complicated topic for a lot of people. There is no right, perfect answer of when to disclose, when to talk about these things, if ever. I find disclosure to be very personal and very situational. I have chosen to be very upfront at times, and other times I've never said anything. How I talk about it with a manager might look very different than how I talk about it with colleagues. Might look different than how I talk about things with a manager at a different company. Might look different than how I talk to my friends. Might look different than how I talk to my family. And might look very different than how I might consider disclosing to someone if I'm going on a first date. All of these things matter when we talk about disclosure. There's so many different ways to do this. There's so many different ways to weigh those pros and cons. It can be exhausting. But everybody has a different preference of when they think the right time is. So some people might be very honest and disclose in a cover letter or an interview. It might show up in your resume if you said that you were a volunteer or worked with Disability In, for instance, or another organization that's similar. Some people might not say anything until they have a job offer in hand, or if they need an accommodation when they're already working. Some people might try to just white knuckle it through life and never ask for an accommodation because they don't think it's necessary. But there is a legal answer to when to disclose. And that general rule is that you don't have to share until you need an accommodation. Because in order to make sure that you're not being discriminated against, there needs to be a record of disability and proof that they actually knew. All sorts of things in that realm as well. So when we're thinking about disclosure, we have quite a bit to be thinking about and unpacking. And there's so much that we could do in order to make this process a little bit less intimidating. And a lot of it, the time we're thinking about young people. That young people might not have had that experience of having to disclose, of knowing that much. So there's all sorts of wonderful information. Please bear with me while we have a very quick commercial, basically, talking about resources for preparing young people and people with disabilities to talk about disclosure. And what we really want to do is promote self-advocacy by discussing these topics and having resources. So some of the best resources out there come from the federal government. You could check them out from the Office of Disability Employment Policy. I really like that they had this idea about the 411 on disability disclosure for young people. I also love how Virginia Commonwealth University talks a lot about how to make these decisions. And the best things to do when we're making disclosure decisions, as they say, is there's 3 big steps to it. Is that we have to determine the need to disclose, when to disclose, and how to disclose. So keep in mind your safety might look different depending on who you are. If you're someone who has different feelings about your disability, if you are afraid that your environment might be hostile, if you are multiply marginalized and are afraid that you might be judged differently because of ableism and racism, or ableism and sexism, or something at the middle of multiple intersections, and that might also weigh into your decision too. But I think what makes this such a really fun resource and really good is that it kind of explains the different ways to disclose, how to disclose, and what your pros and cons are, and also how we can do this, and how we can do this in a way that feels safe and effective, depending on how and where we are in the process. I also think one of the best things that we have out there is if you're curious to know more about disclosure, or we're curious about things like accommodation solutions, that check out the Job Accommodation Network. You can find that at askjan.org. And Ask Jan has so many great resources, especially because each disability is very different. So I talk a lot about autism, but I might not know the ins and outs for a learning disability, or I might not know what's best for a traumatic brain injury. But our friends at Ask Jan and the Job Accommodation Network probably have all sorts of great resources and ideas of what might be some good accommodation solutions, interviewing tips, because interviewing is one of the biggest places that neurodivergent people seem to fall short. When we're talking about differences in interviewing, it means that we're looking for very specific things, and things that might be common neurodivergent behavior, such as fidgeting or lack of eye contact, might be judged and perceived negatively when they're a huge part of how somebody is regulating themselves or how they are acting. So I am someone who is very bad at looking at people, mostly because it means all of my attention goes into looking like I'm paying attention, that I can't actually really focus on what you're saying. Or something like fidgeting, that might be the thing that keeps me regulating my attention when you're seeing it as that I'm distracted or I'm nervous. So I feel like my hands always have to be moving or doing something so I can focus, but that isn't the case for everybody. And we tend to judge these behaviors harshly or differently because we don't understand why they happen. I also want to talk about the legal gap between disclosures and accommodations, because we're going to start talking a little bit about accommodations and other ideas that kind of come under here as well, or more about disclosure too. And when we're talking about the Americans with Disabilities Act, which we talked about it very briefly when we were defining disability and unboxing that, it really forbids employers from discriminating against applicants or employees on the basis of disability. So the ADA covers that whole bridge from hiring to firing. And of course, you don't have to disclose unless an accommodation is needed. Like, that is the general legal principle. And we're talking about the ADA if you are in compliance or you want to know a little bit, that employers of a business that has 15 or more employees, please check your state civil rights laws to see if it's more restrictive, that you have to provide reasonable accommodations to qualified individuals with disabilities, except when it causes undue hardship. And when we're talking about undue hardship, we're talking about that the solution is either impossible or it's very, very expensive. I also want to talk a little bit more about those disparities and why people don't share. Because a lot of the times we think, well, we have people with disabilities and they don't want to talk about it. Or why don't we talk about it? Because again, this is something that's so personal and so individualized. And when we're thinking about this as a personal decision, we're thinking about why people might not share. We don't want to be judged. We don't want to be perceived as weak. I come from legal, and the minute that a client or opposing counsel perceives you as weak, it damages your case. It doesn't end up helping anybody. You don't want to be perceived that way. You want people to see you as a full person. You want to be seen as strong. You want to be seen as capable. We also don't want to be receiving special treatment or have people think we are. I remember in my first job, I was getting accommodations and everybody thought that I was the favorite of the office. Whether or not I was the favorite, I really don't know. But I was being checked on more regularly. I was being given more feedback, more guidance, all sorts of things that other people weren't. And I can kind of gauge that my coworkers were unhappy about it. We also have these ideas of internalized ableism, which is kind of a huge mess, and we're going to talk about a little bit more after this too, is that you start to begin to internalize different disability messaging that's negative or things about your own disability. And it ends up impacting your self-esteem and putting pressure on yourself and all sorts of other stuff. People also rightfully are afraid of stereotypes and discrimination. That ableism is a huge piece of this puzzle. And of course, if you are in certain professions, you might be afraid about whether or not you're perceived and viewed as being professional, or if you're being licensed. So I know for attorneys, we have to get our bar licenses, and I know we have to go through a rigorous character and fitness screening. And for folks who have mental health disabilities, they ask questions. They ask if you ask me too many questions about mental health, such as your treatment plans, and it could look like disability discrimination, or people just feel ashamed and don't end up sharing because they're afraid it could impact their licensing prospects. So there's lots of things to think about as to why people don't share about disability. And when we're talking about that internalized ableism component, here's some of the things that kind of go through our heads. I have thought every single one of these at some point in time. Is you think that you're a burden. You worry that you're asking for too much if you need help. You think that you don't have a shot at getting a job. You think that you're not good enough. That imposter syndrome isn't just that. You're seen as that you're not good enough because you feel like you have to work twice as hard to get half as far. Or you think that something is wrong with you, that you're broken, that you need to be fixed, that you have to act in a way that's going to exhaust you and isn't true to you. There's so much to unpack here to think about, because this is something I still struggle with. I spent my entire school career, especially in professional school, thinking that I was dumb, that I was lazy, because my brain worked differently and I wasn't able to do the same ways of studying and different things that my peers were doing. And it made me think I was a burden if I asked for accommodations or I needed help. And I also just didn't know what help I was able to receive. That we had this tendency to think that everything in school can be solved by extra time. I never needed extra time. I didn't know I can ask for something else. I thought it would be too much if I said I needed a note taker or somebody wouldn't believe me. I thought I had to do it all myself. And looking back, I was very wrong. And now I know better. But I don't know if I would have known that as a young 21-year-old. So the more you know and the more we learn, right? And when we're thinking about accessibility, we're thinking about accommodations, that we don't always have to take that first thing that's offered to us, like that extra time component. And when we're thinking about accommodations and accessibility, we have this misconception that accommodations are going to cause undue hardship, that they are really difficult to implement, that they're going to be expensive, that they're going to be difficult in some way, shape, or form. But the truth is, accommodations are usually free. But if there is a cost, it usually is a one-time of $500 or less. So there's not really that much cost when it comes to implementing accommodation solutions. And every single person might have different needs. Some of us might have sensory needs like I did. So in my first job, we had fluorescent lights in my office. And they hum all day long. And it made it really hard to focus, on top of the fact that they're very bright. And some folks might get migraines, but for me it was the sound. And it made it impossible for me to do what I had to do. I probably couldn't have gotten my office building to replace all the fluorescent lights to help minimize the noise. That would have probably been an undue hardship or unreasonable. But what was reasonable is that we agreed that I was allowed to wear headphones at work. And we decided on headphones because it didn't cost my employer anything and I was able to block out the noise. The one thing is that I had to be able to hear the phone ring. So it didn't matter how loud the lights were or how loud my headphones were, as long as I can hear the phone. So that meant I can have them as quiet as I wanted to just block out noise. I can have some background music if it made me feel calm or able to focus better. And everybody has different needs. Some of us need really clear instructions and constant calendar invites. We need direct communication. Some of us need to take breaks. Some of us need to be able to move our bodies, to move our hands. Everybody needs something different. And when we're going about getting accommodations, we should be looking at this like a conversation. But of course, if you can, try to get everything in writing so you have it all documented. But I think when we approach it like a conversation, it makes it less intimidating for everybody involved. I feel like it makes it more doable, and also we're ready to go. It makes my life easier, and it certainly has made my employers' lives easier when we've just had a conversation and tried to brainstorm what we thought the best solutions would be together. When we talk about accommodations and disclosure, I want us to think about how we can be more authentic going forward. So how do we start getting people to feel that it's safe to talk about disability, that it's safe to talk about neurodiversity, that we're able to celebrate these differences rather than keep them in the closet or something that we should be afraid of? So you see, people usually feel that they have to disclose when one of the following things happens, that they need an accommodation, they have to share. They might not want to, but they feel like they absolutely must share. Or you have no intention of sharing and you're trying to adapt and self-accommodate and do what you can by yourself. And all of a sudden you burn out, or the changes in the pace of work picks up and what's working or has been working for you is no longer working. We also have differences in how we communicate. when there is the crossing of wires and we have this breakdown in communication, it forces people to feel like they have to out themselves because they don't want to have their job on the chopping block. They want to be sure to say, this is what's going on. Or you have a change in life circumstances. Maybe you just received a diagnosis, or maybe you were in an accident and you just acquired something that changed your disability status. That a change in life circumstances that can happen in a split second could be the thing that forces you to share, because you might not be able to do your job the way that you used to be able to. Or maybe you have answers to why things are the way they are. But there's a different way than feeling like you are boxed into sharing. You could be a voluntary disclosure. And there's a couple reasons why people do this. People like me are voluntary disclosures, and we usually do it because we don't want to be lying about who we are. We want to bring our full selves to work, and we take pride in who we are. I'm proud to be autistic. I don't see something wrong with me being disabled. I have a lot of ownership of those identities as part of who I am. I also know that I miss a lot of things socially. I want to be proactive. I want to limit any misunderstandings between me, my colleagues, and a potential supervisor. I also see my neurodiversity as a strength. But when I say that I see it as strength, I don't see it as superpowers. I'm scared when people say that my autism is a superpower, because it puts a lot of pressure on me. It means that I don't get the luxury of being average like so many of us do. Is that I have to be superhuman, but I'm not superhuman. I am a person. There are things I'm really good at, yes, and those are my strengths. But seeing my entire disability as a full superpower can just be exhausting to think about sometimes. But I don't know what it's like to be non-disabled. I don't know what it's like to be neurotypical. I do know that I'm creative. I know that I'm sensitive. I know that I'm empathetic. I know that I'm a hard worker. I know that I'm motivated. I see these things as strengths, and I know that if I had a different life experience, I don't know if I'd be the same person. I don't know if I'd have the same character traits that I think that I have, or other people have told me that I have. So for me, I do see neurodiversity as one of our greatest strengths as a group, and I do see my neurodivergence as a personal strength, or at least something that I've learned a ton from over the years of being in this brain and body. Which is also why I am openly autistic. And when I get described as openly autistic, someone always asks me, what does this mean? And when I'm talking about being openly autistic, I'm saying I don't have to feel like I'm suppressing who I am or masking my autism, that I have the freedom to be exactly who I am. I recognize this is a huge privilege. I recognize that not everyone who is autistic or neurodivergent feels that they can be open, that there's a safety component to it, that maybe if you are also a woman, you might be afraid to be open because there are higher rates of assault and harassment for women who are neurodivergent or who have intellectual and developmental disabilities. For people of color and other groups, I know that you might be afraid to be open or to be maybe stimming too much or fidgeting or pacing back and forth or something that might be calming to you in public because you're afraid of being seen as suspicious. You don't want to accidentally be on the wrong side of police brutality or something like that. You have reasons that why you have these coping mechanisms, that you feel it's not safe to be yourself. Or maybe you just are afraid of being discriminated against. There's so much that goes into this, but no matter who you are and where you are on that journey, you are valid. You deserve to be celebrated. You are loved. You belong somewhere. It's just finding where you belong. That is the hard part, especially when the world isn't always designed with you in mind and isn't always thinking about your different needs. Sorry about that. And when we're talking about being open and we're talking about all these things, I want to quickly switch gears towards self-advocacy. See, with disability circles, we talk a lot about advocating for ourselves. We talk about what that means. And if you aren't so familiar with the idea of self-advocacy, I got you covered. Because when we're talking about self-advocacy, I'm talking about how it's both a set of skills and it's also a personal and political philosophy. So self-advocacy really empowers people with disabilities so that we're able to make choices that affect our daily lives and allow us to be more independent. So whether or not we know it, we advocate for ourselves every single day. All of us do. And we make decisions every day. We decide what we're eating for breakfast, when we're getting up, what we're wearing, what we're doing, how we're getting somewhere. We make all of these decisions on a daily basis. And sometimes for people with disabilities, we aren't in control of those decisions. It can be as restrictive as we have a legal guardian who's making decisions, or that our disabilities make it very difficult for us to do these things. So when we're talking about self-advocacy to empower people, it's a movement that's by and for people with disabilities who do make decisions for themselves. We speak for ourselves and for and alongside others with disabilities and are taking control over our own lives. I think this is so powerful to think about. It's being able to have some degree of independence. I do think independence is a really interesting concept. Nobody is truly independent. We all rely on other people for something. That maybe we're reliant for money. Maybe we're reliant because there's a service that we aren't able to do for ourselves. I have no idea how to fix my air conditioner. I live in Florida, it's always hot outside, and my air conditioner breaks at least once a year. I have no idea how to fix that. I don't have to know how to fix that. Part of being an advocate for myself means knowing that I need help and knowing how to get that help. So I think when we talk about self-advocacy and independence, it's really important, even with work, that we talk about how to know when you can't do something by yourself. We have this kind of illusion in disability that independence means you're able to do everything on your own. That is the furthest thing from the truth that I have learned. But when we're in the workplace, we're able to advocate for ourselves and for others. So when we're asking for accommodations or realizing that we need them, we're advocating for ourselves. And we're able to do this in so many different ways. So when we see it as a conversation, it helps us grow. It helps us go through these conversations. And I am really bad at starting conversations. And sometimes I don't feel comfortable talking about my disability too much with someone. But I like to follow scripts in those cases. So something that I do is I just say, I work best when, and fill in the blanks. Think about what helps you work best. I work best when we don't schedule meetings first thing in the morning. I work best when you give me clear instructions. And when I say I need clear instructions, that signals to an employer, maybe we need to make sure that we spell things out a little bit more. We have to make sure that we are being open, that we are telling you when the deadlines are, and that we're telling you exactly what we're expecting. It doesn't tell you I am disorganized because of my disability. It doesn't tell you that my executive functioning or ability to start and stop and plan and figure out what's most important and when to focus and all of those things of just getting things done, that executive functioning component is a huge disabling aspect of autism. It just tells you this is something that you can help me with so I can help you be better at what needs to be done. We also have to make decisions. We have to decide who needs to know about our disabilities, who we want to know. And of course, those pros and cons of disclosure that we talked a little bit about earlier. And once we feel like we're at a really good place with our self-advocacy journeys, we can advocate for others, that we can have solutions that benefit everybody or policies that benefit everyone. The very first legal internship I had was at a disability rights nonprofit. And at this nonprofit, I remember looking through the employee handbook, and there was a fragrance-free policy. And I sat there, and at first I balked. I was like, oh my gosh, I can't wear deodorant. This is going to be disgusting. Everything's going to smell bad. And I ended up asking a question about the policy, asking if that's what it meant. Thankfully, I was wrong. The fragrance-free policy only applied to perfume and cologne. And that policy was put in place because a past employee or intern, I don't remember which, had allergies. And because of those allergies, she couldn't be around too much perfume or too much cologne. So they adapted a fragrance-free policy to help her. And it also ended up helping people with sensory sensitivities. And I realized that one person who needed an accommodation somehow got an entire policy change. So that way, anybody who might have allergies or sensory sensitivities in the future wouldn't be affected by things our colleagues were doing. I thought that was a really powerful thing, realizing that we all have that power to be able to advocate for ourselves in a way that benefits other people. It did benefit me in the end. I do not have the strongest sense of smell, but if someone smells like a walking cloud of perfume or cologne, it makes my eyes water and it's just overwhelming. So I was spared of something that could be really overwhelming, even though I wasn't expecting it. I ended up benefiting from this person who also had allergies or sensory sensitivities. And realizing that that person advocating for themselves ended up helping me advocate for myself and have my needs met as well. So sometimes the solutions that we have end up benefiting more than just ourselves. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about moving forward now that we can think about advocating for ourselves or others. We have a little bit to unpack here. And what we're thinking about is, what if we took a strengths-based approach on this future of neurodiversity? What if in future of work? What if we stopped looking at everything through a deficit model? We tend to see disability as this negative, scary, bad thing. But we don't focus on the strengths. We don't think about how people might be really detail-oriented. They might be able to focus or hyper-focus on something for a long period of time. They might have great memories. Or they might be experts in something that we never thought about. We might have thought maybe that thing was weird or strange, or that person is just in their own world. But that expertise can be really, really valuable. We're also honest and loyal. We're good people, a lot of us, hopefully. And a lot of the times that honesty gets interpreted as rudeness. I am blunt and honest to a fault. I have had friends that have asked me when they were out shopping if something looks good on them, and one girl tried on an orange shirt and I told her she looked like a carrot. I think it hurt her feelings, and she really didn't want to hang out with me. But then she realized was I right, but that I was telling her the truth about how I felt, and that I trusted her enough to do that. She realized I was loyal, that I wanted her to do what was best for her, and that I wasn't afraid to lie, that I wasn't going to lie to her about how I felt to protect her feelings, that I was going to keep it straight. And I think that integrity is something we don't think a lot about. We focus so much on these social faux pas, like saying that someone's shirt makes them look like a carrot, more so than that they're being honest with us, or that they're demonstrating that commitment to their friendship or their work or others around them. And of course, from a lifetime of having to adapt, of being resilient, or having this desire to keep growing beyond just being distracted or being impulsive or whatever it might be that comes with something like autism or ADHD, we're really creative. We want to be curious. We want to keep growing. We have so much in our own brains that we want to get out, and we can really drive that innovation. Imagine if we just looked at it from this idea, from some of these skill sets, instead of all the bad things or things that we think are deficits or difficult. Just because we don't always understand doesn't mean that it's necessarily or inherently all bad things. And when we focus on the strengths, I want to talk a little bit more about some of these, and I really like this illustration. Correction, I love this illustration. I wish I had drawn it myself, but I love this idea of all the stuff that happens in the brain, especially for neurodivergent people and neurodiversity, and how we think of people with disabilities as well, about how we're able to concentrate, that we observe, that we're creative, that we're thinking about things or expressing ourselves in unique ways, that passion and that energy for the things that we love and care about, the range of knowledge that we have, that we're willing to be ourselves, that we might be very visual learners or have different ways of expressing what we know. See, I like slides because I'm very visual. I can talk at you all day long, but I like visuals because I also need something to follow along with, or I'll start a tangent and then you won't hear, I'll forget where I left off. So for me, this helps me stay focused as well. I like when we think about what we're good at, the things that often get overlooked or seen as eccentric or strange. Imagine if we just looked at these things as part of being human. Not that we're better, not that we're worse, but we're just different. And that goes to the heart of what I learned when I first learned about my own autism, is that my parents told me that different was neither better nor worse. It's just different. And different can be extraordinary. When I think about those words, I often think about what it means to be different. It doesn't mean that I'm wrong. It doesn't mean that I'm broken. It doesn't mean that I am fundamentally so odd that nobody wants to hang out with me or work with me. It means that some things happen differently. There are things that I'm really good at that other people aren't. There are things I'm really bad at that other people aren't. But if we took the time to really get to know each person, to really work with them, to get to know them, we're going to be surprised. And I don't want to see this as that we're going to take a chance on people with disabilities, because it's not that we want a chance. We deserve an opportunity that might not be there for so many different reasons, about the ways that our job descriptions are written, the things that we say are important but aren't that important. There's a lot to be thinking about. or even just how we interview in the non-verbal or non-objective, the subjective things that we look for when deciding if someone is a great fit. If we look past that, we might have a really talented pool of people. We have a large group of people that are traditionally underemployed or unemployed that are ready, willing, and able to work. And we're talented if only we have the right support and we have open hearts and open minds. That being said, I want to talk about some stuff that we could do to walk away and be more inclusive from the beginning. Something that we could do is learn to trust one another. And when I say that, we can be open and vulnerable, and especially if you are someone who is perceived as being in power. I know that we are all at different stages in our careers, and some of us have more power and more privilege than others. I teach a college class on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and on the first day of every semester, I'm extremely open with my students. They know that I have autism, they know how it affects me, they know that sometimes they have to email me or call me or bother me more than once. Don't worry, they have an office number to call me at, so they don't really get to bother me too much. But that's part of the conversation we have on the first day of school. And on the first day of school, one student gives me her disability services paperwork for accommodations. I think nothing of it. Of course, I'm going to grant her whatever she needs to be able to succeed. I made sure that my class has closed captions because we teach over Zoom, that they get recordings at the end. I made sure everything is as well running and efficient as possible so everybody feels class is accessible. So the first day continues, and the student who gave me the paperwork earlier in the morning speaks up. She starts talking about her experience with her learning disabilities. I was extremely not expecting this. And then something else happens. It feels like a miracle, but there's a ripple effect in class. Two other students who are not receiving accommodations from the university start talking about their experiences as neurodivergent and disabled people. One tells me that they're in the process of getting a diagnosis. The other says that they probably need accommodations, but they don't know how to go about that from the university. And listening to these discussions was something I didn't expect to be spending the first day of school dealing with. But I realized that these college students, these young people who didn't know each other and who didn't know me on that first day, felt that I was someone they can trust, that they were able to trust me because I was in authority, I was in a position of power, and I trusted them. It often falls on the people who are most junior to be open, to be sharing everything because you're the new person. But when we're thinking about the new person, it shouldn't always fall on us to be doing that extra labor. If we're open from the top about experiences that we have, we create this culture of inclusion to begin with, if only we have a little bit of faith and a little bit of trust in each other. We also need to look beyond the stereotypes. When I say we align people to their strengths, I mean that we look at each person as an individual, not as a stereotype. There's a huge stereotype in the autism community that we're all really good at science, technology, math, computers. I went to law school. I did not major in any of those things. Like many people who went to law school, I went to law school because I'm not good at those things. And I get to my first job. I'm an attorney, and I am being asked to do lots of technical stuff. And I'm pretty sure it's because of my disability. And I end up doing all sorts of computer things. I end up running the website. And I put all this pressure on myself because I feel like I'm lucky to be employed in the first place when I know now that's not the case. That we're just not always given the opportunities we deserve, and we don't have to stay somewhere that we don't always feel happy with either. And I'm doing this stuff. I'm putting all this pressure on myself to succeed, to be a computer genius, essentially, when I'm not. And I'm realizing it's making me stressed. It's making me anxious. It's making me afraid of being exposed as an imposter of some sort, or that they're going to regret hiring someone with a disability. Something thankfully changes. And I don't think it's because I advocated for myself because I was too scared to do that at the time. But I start getting matched to non-technical tasks, probably because they needed lawyers to do more lawyer stuff. And I get to start writing. I get to start doing research. And I'm that much happier. The work product is better. I am thriving. I am not putting pressure on myself in the same way anymore. So having that alignment to things I was good at and letting people do what they're actually passionate about and what they're hired to do is really powerful, it's empowering, and it allows us to succeed. All of this comes from having open and meaningful communication. If I had advocated for myself sooner, I probably wouldn't have been doing technical tasks as long. But when we think about how to communicate openly with each other and be meaningful and intentional, I think this is something all of us can do, whether or not we're neurodivergent or neurotypical. And something that's come up in the past is we talk about how to work with each other. So think about this when we are, especially if you're in management, is picture coming up with 3 bullet points, and have everyone on your team do this too, of 3 bullet points of things that are really important to know about working with you. 3 bullet points to know about working with me are: I am not a morning person. I am very good about texts and emails, because if you call me, and I don't expect it, I probably think I'm in trouble, or I think that somebody got hurt, and I need clear instructions. Those are 3 things that you should know about working with me. That's a great conversation starter. It doesn't tell you anything about whether or not I struggle with lateness, or I struggle with executive functioning, or maybe I am a better written communicator than verbal communicator. It doesn't tell you anything related to my disability. It just tells you this is the best way to support me so I can support you. And if all of us did that, it would make it more normal to have those conversations without exploring why that's the case. It kind of plays into this idea of universal design. And when I talk about universal design, I'm saying that we're doing things like designing our buildings, products, environments, and everything so they're accessible to everybody. 2 of the biggest examples of universal design for you, if this is something that's new: captions and elevators. When I think about closed captions, a lot of us use them. Not all of us are deaf or have a hearing impairment. We use closed captions because we might be visual learners. We might be learning a second language. We might be getting something out of the cues that are given. So I get something out of the social cues that are in captions. Sometimes they tell me if the mood is going to be romantic or suspenseful or sad. And they also tell me if a character is laughing, or if they're being sarcastic, or if they're scoffing, and what their gestures are sometimes. Those things help me have an extra context clue to enjoy entertainment. I am not deaf or hard of hearing, and I still get a lot out of that. The same goes for elevators. If you've ever been in a tall building and you've been in an elevator, there's so much in there to make it accessible to everybody forever. You have the buttons that are also in Braille. You have the tones that tell you if you're going up or down. You have the red and green lights. You have the robot lady voice that tells you where you are, or if you're going up or going down. You have all sorts of things that no matter who you are, you're not going to get lost. I think that's pretty incredible to think about. And sometimes it might be competing when we talk about whose brains and whose bodies are responding to what. So it might be really hard sometimes if you're very auditory and then you're bombarded with a bunch of visuals, but everybody's able to get what they need in those situations. And finally, I want us to be good mentors, especially when we have neurodivergent people at work, if we have the opportunity to mentor people. A lot of us think that once we have disability inclusion at work, we're done. Once we hire people, we're done. That's just the beginning. A lot of us want careers. We don't want jobs. We want to be welcomed. We want to be accepted. We want the same opportunities to learn and grow as anybody else. And finding good mentors has been the thing that I've struggled the most with. But I've always taken it upon myself to mentor younger people. So I do mentor a lot of students at this point because they don't often get access to that. Especially if you are neurodivergent and already there, taking time to mentor someone else who's new or who is lower on the ladder is really important. That we're able to grow when we help each other and make sure that we're able to keep doing that. And if you're leading, I hope that you eventually consider us to lead as well. Being able to talk to you about neurodiversity as a neurodivergent person is so powerful. I've gone to so many different trainings and events about neurodiversity that are led by neurotypical people, and they spend the whole time telling me how to act more normal. That doesn't help me. That doesn't help you. And when we're talking about neurodiverse leadership, I imagine how we could flip the script as we go forward into the next generations. That we might be able to revolutionize how we bring people in, what we're judging, what we're looking for. Because I don't think we want to uphold the same systems that end up keeping people out or have people self-select from choosing to come somewhere. I also think that if you are non-disabled or neurotypical and you're in leadership, I encourage you to lead with curiosity. And when I say that you're leading with curiosity, I want you to think about what you've learned, if you have questions, to keep wanting to know more, to realize that it's okay if you don't have all the answers or you don't know all the answers. There's a lot of growing we could do. And I always tell people, if you learned one thing out of the last hour or hour and 15 minutes or so, If there's one sentence that stuck with you, pass it on. That's a way we can lead and we can mentor. We can open those conversations. We can start to trust each other. We can lead with curiosity. And that's something that makes me really excited for the future when we talk about disability inclusion and we talk about bringing in new people and we talk about ending a lot of the disparities that we see in terms of hiring, unemployment, underemployment, salary, that if we're not talking, if we're not having these discussions, we're not going to grow. We're not going to solve these problems. But together, we can. And that makes me so hopeful and have so much faith in you in our future. And I'm really excited for what we're going to do together when we have open hearts, open minds, and we're leading with curiosity at the forefront. So with that, I want to open the floor to questions and everything. And if you want to say hello, or you have questions or feelings or things that you want to talk about offline in a private forum, you can send me an email. You can connect with me on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. I am a millennial. I am very online. I spend too much time on the internet, and I would love to hear from you. So thank you for spending part of your Friday with me, and I look forward to answering some questions and hanging out a little bit with everybody. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much, Haley. We really enjoyed that. Very inspirational, very educational. There were parts of the presentation that were eye-opening and convicting. And there's probably other folks on the call that feel the same way. I do have a couple questions real quick, if we have time. You are an attorney, and so this whole concept of undue burden, as it relates to accommodations and processing through accommodations, what is an undue burden? And in your experience, I don't know if you've had experience litigating accommodations or failure to accommodate cases. Typically, what do you see the courts look at? Do they look at a local operation of a larger company when they're looking at that undue burden question? Or do they look at the total corporation that, you know, has a revenue of whatever $1 billion? If you understand my question.
I think I understand what you're getting at. So accommodations, at least in the courts, seem to be very case by case and individual. So what might be an undue burden might depend on the size of the corporation, what the individual is asking for. Accommodations and ADA cases do tend to be very individualized. I think that a lot of them don't get to that level because they're able to be solved either internally or litigants will realize that the cost of litigation is too high. I did not do accommodations litigation when I was in practice. I represented hospitals against insurance companies. I did managed care. Most of my stuff dealt with ERISA. So that's entirely different stuff to be thinking about. This is the stuff that I do for fun. So I think when it comes to litigation, I don't have all the answers, but I do think that there's a huge process. I know that there's different guidance from the EEOC. I know that sometimes when it does come to ADA litigation that you might start with an EEOC complaint and then they take it to a panel and they decide if it's worth proceeding with or how to go about that as well. There's a lot of different things that go into ADA litigation. It's just not my thing.
Okay, fair enough. Got a question from one of the participants. How do you address people when they say, if you didn't tell me, I would have never known?
It really depends on the person, honestly. So if it's someone that I don't feel comfortable with, I might just suck it up and not say anything. But sometimes I might say that I might actually say that you're seeing a lot of coping skills, or if someone might go, oh, you don't look like you have a disability. If someone says you don't look like you have a disability, my answer is always very standard for them, is I use it as a teachable moment, because I think it's the way to handle it in a professional setting almost of, oh, well, what do you think a person with autism looks like? Or what do you think a person with a disability looks like? And then it's a moment for them to kind of examine their own bias in a safe way. That's how I see it, is they're able to examine that bias in a way that means, oh, okay, I think disability is this thing, but really it encompasses this other thing as well. And it's that moment that everybody kind of learns something and it feels safe. That's where I come from. I want people to be able to learn safely, because I don't think we say things like that intending to be harmful. I think that's the one thing about ableism that people don't get. people, if you ask people about ableism, everyone's going to say, of course they're not ableist. Of course they don't hate people with disabilities. They're not trying to be mean. We're doing things and we're saying things because it's so embedded in our culture, and also because we just don't know better. So I think when we have the chance to educate in a way that doesn't make people feel bad about themselves, I'm all for it.
Right. Great point. Great point.
And we're all learning and unlearning too. I mean, I think about language more often than not. I am still trying to do better about ableist language in my personal life. So if you listen to me, I'm trying really, really hard to avoid saying things like crazy, insane, moron, idiot. I'm trying to avoid all of those words now, and it's really difficult. And I try to avoid them because some of them are harmful to intellectual disabilities and others are harmful to psychiatric disabilities. I have friends with mental illnesses who tell me that crazy invalidates every single one of their experiences because they just get written off and they don't get any help. And I'm like, wow, we say that all the time. And I have gone through days where I'm like, I'm just going to challenge myself to see how many times I could avoid saying it and how many times I hear it. And when I am just consuming media or just out and about, you hear these things more often than you think. You realize that ableism is part of our existence, whether or not we are being conscious of it. Or sometimes we're offering assistance and insisting on that assistance when it's neither wanted nor needed. That happens to me a lot. And when I say that I don't want or need help, trust me when I say that. I don't love having help forced on me when I don't need it. I will tell you what I need. I want to be able to be in control in that way. I think about this with a friend of mine who is an ambulatory wheelchair user, and every single time she goes to load her wheelchair in her car, somebody insists on helping her. And she doesn't want it or need it because she has an exact system to stow her chair that also allows her to get back into the driver's seat very easily. And if a stranger helps her, it ruins her flow. They might damage her chair. She's always very hesitant, and they always insist on helping her. And when she says, I don't need help, she really means it. So I think even just taking your cues and listening from people with lived experience is one of the greatest things that you could do as well.
Right. Great point. Great answer. With that, to honor everybody's time and respect everybody's time here this morning, and I want to pass the baton over to Jonathan Taylor for some closing comments. And again, as you can see on the screen, I want to encourage you to get involved with us here at Disability in Arkansas at di-ar.org. And Haley also provided her contact information as well. So Jonathan, bring us home. Appreciate you.
Thank you, Mark. One last thing before I close it out. If you're unaware, Haley is an author. She has a new book coming out. It's on Amazon, and it doesn't have an official release date from what I can see, but it is available for pre-order. The Young Autistic Adults Independence Handbook. I've already got a copy pre-ordered, so get yours. I'm excited. So thank you, Mark, for handing it over to me. I'm the executive director for the Arkansas Governor's Council on Developmental Disabilities. And as we said at the beginning, October is National Disability Employment Awareness Month. And I've had the pleasure of touring the state, not just in Zoom, but in person, talking about competitive integrated employment. And most of the organizations that are represented in the audiences are already practicing inclusive hiring and building integrated workplaces. And when I talk with them, they all get it. They say, we understand the benefits of building integrated workplaces. We understand inclusive hiring. We get it, and you're preaching to the choir. The challenge, not just for this webcast, but for all of us that work in this space, is for more organizations to get it too. They talk about preaching to the choir. A choir can reach the message inside. A bigger choir can bring people from the outside in. One voice with one message can move one barrier. Haley had a great example, a fragrance-free workplace. One person had an objection, they fixed it. Multiple voices in unison with one message can move mountains and create lasting systems change. So my challenge to you out there is find your voice, join our choir, and let's start moving mountains. Thanks for your time.